Hey there! I'm Chroma, and welcome to part 14 of Making an Abstract Adventure. Welcome back! This time, we've made some collectibles for our characters to pick up, as well as a few other small things, such as sort of the framework for how our characters will interact with things like buttons, levers, doors, etc. And, if we zoom out a lot, we have some new UI elements, mainly for our collectibles that we've made, and a counter beside them that'll increment as we collect more of them, as well as some minor changes to our health UI, as we'll see right now. So going into play mode, the first thing that you'll notice is that our UI elements go away. They go off screen while they're not being used, and actually if I move over here, over to our spike hazards that we made, and take some damage, then they come onto screen. The damage is taken. The UI element is there for a few seconds, and then it goes back off screen. This allows there to be less clutter on screen while we're actually like in levels and stuff. And yeah, also just kind of looks cooler to sort of fade in and then fade out. You also, for our health specifically, each individual health element is now like hovering individually, which looks kind of cool, I guess. Just kind of a design thing to look cool is basically what that was, for some polish, I guess. And then now onto our these collectibles that we made. They also have different parts that are spinning. This is just kind of a design thing, just experimentation. If I go, just pausing play mode just for a minute, go back over here. So these images were basically just made using our white circle and a new white triangle sprite that I've made. Yeah, basically just making an equilateral triangle with some space at the bottom, just so it kind of pivots better around like the actual kind of what the center of the image is then kind of the center of the equilateral triangle for it to turn correctly. And then as well, so the different parts of these images are rotating differently. That's also just kind of for style and all that. As well, these are also all hovering up and down and kind of at some different frequencies, I guess, so they're not all hovering at the same way at the same time. Now in terms of collecting these, when we collect one, then that the collectible that we collect, it comes on screen, it's a UI thing, and then it increases by 1, is there for a few seconds, and then goes off screen. The same with this triangle one. Now, the way that this is currently set up is that only the sphere character can only collect the triangle ones, and then the cube character can only collect the sphere ones. That is more of for a gameplay story reason that I guess I can explain it. Basically, so for most of the game, kind of like 2/3 of it, we'll only have levels of either being just the cube character or just the sphere character. And there'll be more towards the end of the game-ish when we start having levels where you are both of them. That's more stuff that we'll get into kind of when we finish the demo, when I go and explain more of the rest of the game past this demo. And sort of have a nice balance of like, for example, with the cube levels, to have a nice balance of like cube things and sphere things, I guess. We're having the cube character collect the sphere collectibles, and then the sphere character collecting the cube characters, or cube collectible things, which are currently unnamed, but I might give them some name eventually later on when they actually have when I have more planned out what they actually are and how they're used. They also won't be as frequent as they are here. They'll kind of be the collectibles that are more very rare in levels, and there's only like a few of them in the whole level, and they're like hidden away and that kind of thing. So they're not going to be sprinkled across levels like they are here. This is just kind of testing around with numbers and making sure everything is working properly. Now as well, we have this sort of interact field thing here. If we're within the bubble of this here, and we press the O button, then at the moment down here it's just printing out a message just saying like interact test. So like we've interacted with it. This will kind of be used later on for if we interact with like a lever or a button or something. Basically, by interacting with it, it's going to sort of run a script on another object, basically the object that we interact with, and then that will do more fancy stuff that we'll get into when we actually make that stuff. Also, going up here real quick over to our water section over here, I've also just put these interactables in water as well, just to see if they were, to make sure that they were actually still working properly even while underwater, and they are. Also the interact thing as well, which is making more interact messages. So cool. Now that's all of that. Let's get into all of the how it's working. starting with our interact stuff, because that's the easier thing to explain, I guess. Just get it out of the way. So starting off, we have a hidden inspector public boolean called can interact, and then an on trigger stay function, which basically, first, if this can interact boolean is true, this is something that can get enabled or disabled by our circle main and square main script, which I guess actually covering these first. Both of these have the same additions to them in that they get a reference to the player interact, get a reference over in awake over here, and then in on enable and on disable, then it's getting a reference to the can interact boolean that we just saw and setting it to true when this player is enabled, and then setting it to false when the player is disabled. So when we switch characters, or any other reason that the main scripts are disabled. So basically when we're not as that active character, we can't interact things. So first of all, testing whether or not that's true or false. Then testing if the thing that we've, the trigger, that collider that we've entered, if it's on layer 12, which if I go back to Unity, that is, if I go over to this test interact object here, it's on a new layer that we've made called interact, which is on layer 12. As well, it has a tag called test, and there's actually a few other collectible tags that we'll look at in a second. So first of all, testing if the thing we've interacted with is on layer 12, which will be the layer that all interactable trigger things will be on. And then finally, if we've pressed the O key. So if all that is true, we are within something that we can interact with, we can interact, and we press the button, then yes, we can interact with something. Now we have to figure out what we're interacting with and then do something with it. So this is, in here, this is the part that'll kind of be changing a lot as we make more things. Right now it's just saying that if the thing that we collided with has the tag test, then it's just printing the interact test thing to the console here. But eventually, this is what's going to get replaced with like if the collision.compare tag is a button, or if it's a door, stuff like that, then it's going to do different things, which most of them will be running some script on another object. That'll then do more things. I imagine kind of the next thing I'd like to work on is like moving platforms, and once we get that up and running, then I can start making buttons and levers that'll activate things to move, I guess, and then that'll be probably a bulk of interacting with stuff. So that's how interacting is done. Oh, and then the actual object itself is just, yeah, an empty game object with the circle collider, and then it's actually the child object that is the sprite, just because like that's temporary, just so you can kind of see the field of influence. When we have something that we can actually interact with, like a button, there won't really be the glow around it. It'll kind of just be there, and once we're close enough, the collider will go more or less around the button and slightly further. Then that'll work for being able to interact with stuff. So there's that. Next, onto our collectibles. Let's go over those. So first of all, looking at what the actual game object looks like. We've also made a few more empty game objects just to kind of tidy things up in the inspector. So one for the interactables and one for the collectibles. So over here, looking at the square collectible thing that our Cal player, that's the circle character, that character picks up. So first of all, it's a game object that has the tag cal collectible, and then there's also the one that has q collectible as the tags for picking them up. Then there's two scripts on here, object spin and object hover, as well as a circle collider for that's set to its trigger that is used to actually pick up the object. So the spin and the hover, looking at the variables that we have here. So first we have an array of spin speeds and an array of sprites. This is just getting a reference, or getting references to all of these child objects. So this first sprite that is this background triangle, and then one that's the inner gray triangle, and then another one that's this even more inner other magenta triangle. And then, so getting references to all three of those, doing it as an array so it's more flexible, I guess, so that the same script could also be used with the sphere one, and then setting a bunch of spin speeds on that kind of match with each of them. So the 15 matches with the sprite, negative 25 matches with inside, and 35 matches with inside too. And then we'll look at the code in a second of then how it gets all of those to spin. And then on our object hover, then we have kind of an amount that we hover up and down, and then a speed, which is kind of like the frequency, and then a reference to which object that we're moving. Because there are some cases where, this is a case of it, where we have, just to be cleaner, I guess, with having this script kind of on the top layer and not a bunch of objects down. Having it on the top layer, but then the actual object is moves is like a child object, in this case the sprite, so that hovers up and down, but the collider stays in place. Then yeah, collider that's set to is trigger. And then actually I'll also just show the cube, or the Q collectible for the cube character to pick up. It's basically the same thing, just a few different numbers here. So in this case, well, actually, one thing I'm seeing here, I didn't really need to give it a reference to the this center sphere since it doesn't spin, so I can probably optimize that by getting rid of that, setting that to 4, moving all those up 1 and there 2. But yeah, it's getting references to all these arms, I guess, as I called them, which, yeah, just a bunch of circle sprites that were just kind of squished and stretched a little bit. And yeah, that's how that was done. Yeah. Oh, and then also something as well that I've done on the actually both sets of sprites is that the sorting layer set to foreground, and then kind of as we go down to what should be in front of what, just setting the order and layer to 0, 1, and 2, and then for here it being 6, 0, 1, 3, and 4. Yeah. Oh, there was some when I was playing around with designs, there was more stuff that got deleted, so that's also things that can be changed just to match up a bit better. Yeah, so that's basically that's done. And then the object hover script is the exact same, and so is the circle collider. So let's get into the more interesting stuff of how this stuff's actually being then coded to spin and hover and so forth. So first of all, getting these public references as we saw, both as arrays, and then in our update function, just going through each individual sprite, and then yeah, using for int I equals 0, I is less than sprites.length, I plus plus. This will basically just go through every single sprite. And it's also, I guess, required that both of these are the same size, but for the most part that will, yeah, that should always be the case. And if it's not, then there's something wrong. So I'm not bothering to like error check for that, because it's just something that shouldn't happen. I could probably do something more fancy with like combining these into like something that could better have like both of them having the same length, but I'm not going to bother doing that right now. This works just fine as is without being too complicated. So getting reference to whichever sprite we're on going through, and then using it being a transform using transform.rotate along vector3.forward axis, which will rotate the z axis of it, which in this case, because it's a 2D sprite, that's the only axis we care about with turning it. We can technically rotate it on the y and x, but that's just not something we really need to worry about for our purposes. So then using the correct spin speed and then multiplying it by -10 just so that we can have smaller numbers in the inspector. Also making it negative so that having a positive number makes it go clockwise and a negative number makes it go counterclockwise. And then multiplying it by time.delta time so that if the game was paused or we slowed on time or something, it still rotates at the correct speed relative to that. So if you pause the game, it would stop rotating. So there's that. Now onto the object hover script. Oh, actually, one thing I guess I as well mention is that this doesn't use rigid bodies at all. This isn't something that uses physics. This is basically more so for an aesthetic thing and not for like actual like rigid body stuff rotating. If we do have a case where we need a script for rotating rigid bodies, then we can make that more or less the same using I think rigid body to add torque and then kind of having some of the same numbers. But yeah, this is just an aesthetic thing. Same thing with the hover. So we're not bothering to move or to care with like rigid bodies and physical calculations because that shouldn't be an issue. Anyways, so then here we have the 3 public variables that we saw for amount, speed, and the object to move, as well as 2 private variables for the starting position and a time offset that we'll look at what those are down here. So in order for this object to sort of hover up and down, we use the starting position as kind of the like the center point for it to move up and down from, and then we set up what that is by on the first frame just setting what our current position is, also using the local position so that this object can still be childed under other things and still move the way that it should. Yeah, so using the starting position, like setting it to the local position on the first frame, yeah, and then using setting this time offset to, I just put in random.range -5f to 5f, both of those being floats. This will just kind of generate a random number between -5 and 5 as a decimal. And this, we'll get into what that does well, down here. So in our update function, first we're testing whether or not this amount is not 0, because if it is 0, we don't want to be moving up and down at all. Also, there's a thing here with we're dividing by the amount. We don't want to divide by 0 because math does not like that. Yeah, so then actually moving the object up or down. So we're getting the local position and then of the object, and then we're setting it to the starting position plus vector3.up times, because we're only hovering up and down, but I guess if we wanted to hover left or right, we could set up like a direction variable to do that if we needed that. But so we're setting it to starting position plus vector3.up times. Now we're using mathf.cos. If long story short, what mathf.cos will do is it's going to generate a number between -1 and 1. Based on some things, we're plugging in time.time as something that we're then taking the cosine of. Long story short, that's basically going to make the number that we get go between -1 and 1. It's going to slowly go from -1 to 1, then back to -1. It's going to go kind of like in an S fashion. So it's going to kind of slow down as it gets to each of those values, which is the exact effect that we want with the hovering up and down. It's not just like hitting the top and then snapping to moving back down and then stuff like that. So we're using time.time to do that, and then multiplying it by speed so that if we want to move faster or lower. And then we plug in our time offset here, which is just kind of this offset of a variable between like -5 and 5 as just some random numbers, just so that all our things that are hovering are sort of hovering at different amounts, so they're not all moving up and down together, just so it looks more natural in that sense. And then in terms of determining the actual height, we're then dividing it by 1 divided by the amount. That just makes this a nicer number to visualize over in the inspector. To be able to just, I guess, put in 2 and then have it, go up to 2 units and then down 2 units, stuff like that. So, that is how that is being done. Next, actually, I guess one thing I should also say is that the object hover script is also being used. Going over to our UI elements, on our health scripts up here, each of the individual health sprites, I've added the object hover script to, and now they're all working just fine like that. So that's how all of each individual one of those is hovering, as well as the Cal Collectables UI and the Q Collectables UI. So now let's have a look at how these are made. So I basically just recreated the image of what the sprites look like for the collectibles as a UI element, using instead of a sprite renderer, using the image component, because that's what you have to do for UI elements, and then also using the same object spin thing, so it is also spinning in the same way, so it looks the same because that's what it's meant to be, and the same hover script, and then a collectibles UI script that we'll look at in a moment. Then we also have, for the number, basically just also for some fanciness, this is just the same text object twice, once as the back shadow and then another one as the amount. One thing with UI elements and the way that they're organized in the hierarchy is going from like top to bottom. That's the order in which they're drawn. So by having the back shadow first and then the not back shadow, the actual number below it, it's going to draw this gray 0 and then the magenta one over top. So then, that's how we have this looking like a shadow. If we had it reversed, okay, it's not going to let me do that. But if we had it reversed, then the gray one would be drawn on top. So that's how we have that. So both of these are the exact same, and then they're accessed in the same way and changed at the same time. So it kind of has the equivalent of looking like a back shadow. Eventually, also, we might make make a different font instead of Arial. That's kind of temporary. It's just for now, just to have it look slightly better than being placeholder art. I just gave it this drop shadow effect. And then it starts off being 0 and all of that. So then the Q Collectables is done the exact same way. With having the UI element, having the spin, the hover, and then this Collectables UI, and then the back shadow being done in the exact same way. So now looking onto this, this Collectables UI script. So we have a references to both of the players. In this case, the Q player, and for the Cal Collectables reference to Cal, basically to get a reference to that player collect script that we looked at. Actually, did we look at? Oh yeah, we did over here. Oh no, actually I think we missed it. Oops. Yeah. Oh well, I can cover it now. So here we have on both of the players this player collect script, which is how we actually collect stuff. So we have two hidden inspector but public variables, and also, I don't believe I've explained this, having what the benefit of doing this is by having it public but hidden in the inspector. It won't appear in the inspector for us to edit these values because we don't need to, but other scripts can access them. So in this case, our Collectables UI script can access these numbers and then change them without us seeing them in the inspector, because we don't need to see them in the inspector for what they're being used for. So we have this variable num collectibles, which is the number that we've collected, or that specifically the individual player has collected, so that there's two different num collectibles, one for Cal, one for Q, and then a Boolean that's used to be set, that's used for the Collectables UI to update. When we set this to true, the Collectables UI sees that it's true and then updates itself and then sets it back to false. So that's what that's being used for. Actually, I think we did a similar thing with the health script. So anyway, so then here we have an onTrigger enter function, and then we test if the thing that we've collided with has the tag of getting the player's name and then adding the space and collectible to it. So if it's Cal, it's going to look for the tag Cal space collectible, which is what we set as the tag for those collectibles. And if it's Q, then it's going to look for Q collectibles. This just also makes it again, being able to use the same script for both players. It's more optimized that way, I guess. It's just cleaner code, I guess. So then, first of all, the thing that we collided with, the collectible, we're setting that to false, and then increasing the number of collectibles that we have, and then setting collected to true. So that's how that's done. Then back here with the Collectables UI, so we're getting a reference to that script for both of them, then also getting a reference to both of the text components for our UI elements here. So now going into that, so we have the three public variables that I just mentioned, and then a private reference to UI slide that we'll get to in a second. That's the how it's sliding in and out of screen. We'll cover that after we're done this. So in the start function, first getting a reference to the UI slide that again we'll get back to, and then setting the initial values of the text to the player collect.num collectibles, and then turning that into a string because a text component needs a string. As well, when dealing with UI elements, be sure to have this at the top using Unity Engine.ui. This is stuff that I've repeated before, but for people who don't watch all 14 videos, just repeating some things I mentioned in the past, just to have things be easier to find information. All right. Anyway, so once we've initialized all of that data, then in the update function, we're then testing if on the player collect script that we've gotten a reference to, if that Boolean has been set to true, and then once it has, then we're updating what the text values are, and then setting it back to false, and then some stuff here that with the slide UI script of setting stopping all the coroutines on it, and then UI slide.active equals true, which we're actually going to look at right now what that does. So now for the slide UI script, which is on all four of these canvas items, it has four variables here. So we have the active time, which is how long it's on screen when it comes into frame, and then an enter smoothing and an exit smoothing value, which has to do with how smoothly it goes in and out of screen. And then we have a reference to, in this case, itself, or no, sorry, this is off-screen position. Then we have 4 empty game objects for the positions that they're in when they're off-screen. Yeah, I tried doing this through code of just storing some vectors, but then when changing the screen size, it led to issues. So I just having 4 empty variables that do scale with the screen size and then getting references to those, it just works better. So onto our code here with UI slide. So we have these public variables that I just mentioned, as well as a public but hidden inspector variable called active that we just saw in the Collectables UI script, and then a private vector 3 called start position. So when we start, first we get that starting position, which is just where yeah, the object is starting, as we saw in the hover script. And then starting with active equaling false, so that it starts off screen. Then, if active is true, then we are using vector3.lerp, which is, again, something that we've used pretty frequently with our player and stuff like that, and like the camera and all of that. So we're setting the transform.position to vector3.lerp, lerping, or linear interpolating is the actual term, I guess, between our current position and the start position. Because if it's active, that's when we're off screen and moving on to in screen. So we're moving to that start position with the enter smoothing amount. And then if we are, and then also testing if the distance between where we currently are and that start position, if it's less than 1, so if it's close enough to where it needs to be, then it starts this coroutine called deactivate, which is then waiting for that active time and then setting itself to false to then move back off screen. And then if that's the case, so then if active is false, then down here, then we are doing the exact same thing except moving towards the off screen position, which is, yeah, basically the same thing, and then also doing it with a different amount. Just because we kind of move on to screen faster than we move off screen. That just worked out better. So that is how that is done. And then going back to the Collectables UI for a second, then that is how we use the UI slide script here. So when we've updated this UI, in this case, we're then stopping the coroutine so that if it's already on screen, we're kind of resetting this wait to deactivate, and then setting is active to true to then, yeah, have it start moving onto screen to then wait and then move off screen. And then over at our health UI script, we're then also doing the same thing of getting reference to the UI, the slide UI, getting that reference over in awake, and then when we take damage, then having the same 2 lines of when we update the UI, we're then also setting this UI script to be true, or its active thing to be true, and then stopping the coroutines so that it stays on screen if it already was on screen. All right, so that basically covers everything there. So that'll be it for this video. Next time, as I said earlier, I think I'm going to start working on moving platforms, maybe? Or maybe not. Basically, now we're kind of going to be moving away from the player and working on more actual level things. So that's exciting. I have a list of potential things to make. So yeah, like levers, moving platforms, doors that'll kind of... I haven't decided whether it's either going to move you to a different scene or if it'll move you to kind of like a different area of the level of like you go in a door and it'll kind of go in a little like box down here that's sort of treated like it's a different scene, but not really, to save on loading times. In fact, actually, as I say that out loud, that's probably exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah, and stuff like that. Checkpoints, end of levels. When we get checkpoints down, then the player will return to the player to do like player dying stuff and then respawning. And then I don't think I'm going to have lives, but that could change. We'll see. Yeah, and then it's just going to keep snowballing from there until we have more stuff making, yeah, more level things. And then I want to make like a little like demo level to sort of test having all these ideas together. And then, yeah, we'll see where we'll go from there. Possibly then going into working on the first actual level of the game. Oh, and then polish. That's also important. There's a lot of placeholder art in this, and a lot of just things colored randomly, kind of for the sake of coloring them randomly. Eventually, we'll have better art. Although, with these collectibles here, those might be maybe the final designs of what they look like. Because I do want to go for like a geometric art style. I just haven't decided like how simple or how complex. There's also things with like our characters. I haven't decided if they're going to have a style like this or if I'm going to give them a face or even if they had like little hands. I don't think I'd go to the point of having like a humanoid body, because at that point then I'd have to animate like a walk cycle and make that work with, you know, floor stuff. And then also if I do that with the characters, I'm going to do that with all enemies and all characters in the game, which obviously I'd want to have a similar style to. So the more work I put into like the player, for example, I'm going to put the same artwork into other things, other characters and enemies and all that. So I obviously want that to be consistent, but I want it to look good. And I might like, I don't know, try out a few different art styles and just see what looks good, I guess. Oh, and actually on that note, also NPCs, that's something I want to make. Enemies, yeah, and with NPCs, that will be something the interact script is used for as well, with like interacting with them and then them talking and having some kind of dialogue thing, which I could try a few different things like that. With dialogue thing at like the bottom of the screen, like some kind of text panel that comes up and you press enter to continue, or if we have small enough, I guess, dialogue amounts, just having a little speech bubble up here above their head. Who knows? Yeah, there's a lot of places for things to change, for ideas to change. I have like the general game planned out, but it's just a lot of like the nitty gritty that needs more work and more just playing around with ideas. Like these collectible things, I had no idea what I was going to make them look like, and this was just kind of trial and error that made them look like how they do now, and I'm kind of happy with their designs. And yeah, so just stuff like that, spontaneous things like that can lead to cool ideas. But anyways, that's enough rambling from me. Thank you all for watching. If you have any ideas on things you'd like to see in the game, or things that you want changed, or like any ideas that you have, or like improvements, even like art style stuff, yeah, feel free to put them in the comments. I also have a Discord now. That's in the description of all of the videos of this series now. So that'll be it from me then. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you around.